Snow drifted in slow, ghostly spirals across the iron gates of Mornicliff Estate, softening the sharp edges of stone and shadow, but doing nothing to dull the sense of unease that had clung to the place for decades. The carriage wheels crunched over frozen gravel as Lady Eliza Morin adjusted her gloves with careful, almost mechanical precision. At 24, she had already learned how to make her hands appear steady even when her thoughts were not. The estate loomed ahead, a brooding Victorian structure of dark granite and narrow, watchful windows. It had been nearly 2 years since her husband's funeral, and yet the world still spoke to her in whispers, as though grief had turned her into something fragile that might fracture at a raised voice. Tonight, however, she had not come seeking comfort nor refuge. She had come because silence at last had become more frightening than rumor. Inside, candlelight wavered through long corridors, casting warped reflections across polished floors. The air smelled faintly of old wood and extinguished fires. Eliza's boots echoed as a servant led her toward the drawing room, where a single fire burned behind a blackened grate. She dismissed the servant with a murmured thanks and stood alone for several moments, allowing the quiet to sink into her bones. She felt him before she saw him. Lord Nathaniel Ashcroft stood partially concealed by a velvet curtain, his tall frame at ease, one shoulder resting lightly against the wall. He had a habit of stillness that unsettled people, as though he conserved movement for moments of importance. At 29, he carried himself with the cold confidence of a man long accustomed to being judged, and no longer interested in answering for himself. His dark hair was combed back with precision, though the loose strands near his temples suggested restless thought rather than carelessness. "You chose a dangerous place for a conversation," he said, his voice low, controlled and faintly edged with warning. Eliza met his gaze without hesitation. "You chose a dangerous life," she replied. "I am only walking near its edges." The corner of his mouth tightened, not quite a smile, not quite contempt. He stepped fully into the light, and the fire caught the faint scar along his jaw, a pale line against winter-hardened skin. He had not offered her a seat, nor, she noticed, any greeting that might soften the air. He did not treat her as fragile. That alone unsettled her more than rudeness ever could. "I received your message," she continued, folding her hands before her. "You said someone is watching me." He nodded once. "Not watching," he corrected. "Measuring." Silence widened between them. He turned toward the window where frost traced silver veins across the glass. Beyond it, the dark garden stretched like a frozen ocean, every hedge capable of hiding secrets. "There are men in this city who trade in leverage rather than coin. Your name has begun to circulate in their conversations." A chill moved through Eliza, though she kept her face composed. "Because of you." "Yes," he said without denial. "Because you stood beside me at Pembroke Hall. Because you did not look away when others did. In their eyes that placed you within my reach. Or under my protection. The distinction depends on the observer." She studied him as he spoke, noticing the careful economy of his words, the way he never wasted language on reassurance. He was not attempting to comfort her. He was informing her, as one might inform an equal of a battlefield. "And what do they believe they can gain?" she asked. His gaze sharpened as it returned to her. "Control. Silence. Fear. Sometimes all three. The simplest kind of power is the kind that does not need to announce itself." She felt the warning settle into her thoughts, not as panic but as awareness. "You could have warned me before I attended the ball," she said softly. "You could have kept me distant." "I could have," he agreed. The fire caught a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "I chose not to." The admission hung between them, heavier than any promise. He moved closer, not touching, but close enough that she could sense the warmth radiating from him, the quiet tension that lived beneath his calm. Her heartbeat grew louder in her ears, not with fear, but with the unsettling realization that he was not speaking from obligation. "Tell me the truth," Eliza said. whether danger comes from your enemies, or from you. For a moment, he studied her as one studies a locked door, considering what might happen if he turned the key. I am not a safe man, he said. I am not gentle. I do not live in a way that brings peace. But I do not lie to those I choose to warn. The words were not a promise. They were a boundary. The faint sound of footsteps crossed the corridor outside the door, slow, deliberate, then gone. Nathaniel's posture shifted instantly, his attention sharpening, listening past the fire's crackle and the wall's deceptive stillness. Eliza followed his gaze, but saw nothing beyond candlelight and shadow. Your carriage should not remain outside much longer, he said quietly. Long stops are noticed. Long conversations are remembered. She nodded, moving toward the door, pausing only when her hand brushed the handle. If they are measuring me, she said without turning, what do you intend to do? Behind her, his voice dropped to a near whisper. Decide whether to pull you further into danger, or teach you how to survive it. Eliza opened the door and stepped into the corridor, her footsteps controlled, her heart unsteady but her resolve hardening. Somewhere in the vast, silent estate, something had shifted. She felt it in the air, in her veins, in the quiet knowledge that the life she had left behind could no longer be reclaimed. Outside, as the cold wrapped itself around her like a familiar shroud, she realized she could no longer tell whether the greatest threat lay in the men watching from the shadows, or in the one who had just warned her. Mist lay over Edinburgh like a breath held too long, blurring the iron fences and smothering the gas lamps in a dull, amber haze as Eliza Moran stepped down from her carriage and lifted her eyes to Ashcroft Manor. The house rose from the frozen ground like a monument to forgotten vows, its stone face cold, colorless, and watching. The windows reflected nothing but darkness, as though the interior refused to reveal itself to the world without reason. She adjusted her cloak, hiding the tremor in her fingers. Since her meeting with Nathaniel, silence had become structured, deliberate, edged with meaning. Each footstep sounded louder, each passing shadow more purposeful. She felt no urge to turn back. Curiosity, once dormant, had become a quiet hunger. The doors opened before she could knock. Nathaniel stood framed in the candlelight, immaculate in a dark waistcoat, his expression unreadable, his posture controlled. He inclined his head slightly, neither welcoming nor dismissive, as though her presence had been expected but not celebrated. You came alone, he observed. I came prepared, she replied. He stepped aside, allowing her entry into the long, narrow hall. Heavy tapestries clung to the walls, their woven scenes faded by time, while portraits of stern, unfamiliar faces seemed to follow her with quiet accusation. The floor was polished to a dull sheen that made each step sound precise and inescapable. You should not be here, he said as he closed the door behind her. That fact does not escape me. Then why invite me? She asked. He walked ahead instead of answering, leading her to a smaller room near the rear of the estate where firelight flickered low, as if reluctant to fully settle. The air smelled of old leather and cedar, a controlled, masculine scent that carried no softness. He gestured to a chair, but she remained standing. You are not safe, he said finally. That is no longer speculation. That is certainty. Her pulse steadied rather than quickened. Tell me who. He moved to a narrow desk and withdrew a folded document. It was a letter, its edges jagged as though torn in haste. The words were formed from mismatched handwriting, cut from multiple sources and pressed into a crude unity. She walks too freely. She stands too close. Remove her or lose what is yours. Eliza did not react outwardly, though the message carved itself into her thoughts with precise cruelty. You've been threatened before. Yes, he replied, watching her more than the paper. But never with someone else's name placed so deliberately in the center of the blade. That someone being me, she said quietly. He nodded. You have become a complication. Before she could answer, the sound of distant movement drifted through the manor, faint but intentional. Footsteps on stone. A door closing softly. Eliza turned her head slightly, listening. "Who else is here?" she asked. Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Men who do not announce themselves." A knock interrupted them before further explanation. "What?" "Sure. Clean." Without waiting for permission, the door opened and a man stepped inside, carrying the smell of cold air and expensive cologne with him. Lord Heron Blackthorne was every bit as polished as rumor had claimed. At 34, he wore a tailored coat of charcoal wool, his auburn hair combed back with careful arrogance, and his gray eyes bright with casual calculation. His smile appeared soft but never genuine. "Eliza Morin," he said smoothly, bowing just enough to imply respect without granting it fully. "How extraordinary to finally find you here." Eliza felt Nathaniel's position shift subtly closer to her, not touching but present. "You weren't invited," Nathaniel said. Blackthorne laughed lightly. "Invitation is such a narrow word. I prefer opportunity." His gaze turned back to Eliza. "You look remarkably calm for a woman stepping into a house filled with dangerous men." "I look observant," she answered. "There's a difference." Something like approval flashed in his eyes before he masked it with charm. "So there is." "Leave?" Nathaniel said flatly. "Not yet," Blackthorne replied. "Not when matters of interest have only just arrived." Silence tightened. "What do you want?" Eliza asked. Blackthorne folded his gloves slowly, deliberately. "To warn you. And perhaps to save you from an unnecessary tragedy." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "You are the tragedy." Blackthorne ignored him. "You've been noticed, Lady Morin. Not admired. Not envied. Not pitted. Measured. Men far more dangerous than my companion here have begun to wonder what makes you worth threatening over." "I already know I'm being used as leverage," Eliza said. "That knowledge doesn't frighten me." Blackthorne stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then perhaps this will." He produced a small leather-bound book and placed it gently on the table. Its surface was worn, its clasp broken. Eliza did not touch it, but she felt its presence like a wound in the room. "Those are private journal entries written by Ashcroft's first wife," he continued. "In her own hand. Describing fear, isolation, and gradual certainty that she would not survive him." Nathaniel said nothing, but the silence he created was colder than any threat. "You are lying," Eliza said. "I am strategic," Blackthorne corrected. "Truth and lies are only tools. It depends on who wields them." A creak of floorboards sounded overhead, slow and deliberate. Nathaniel's fingers flexed once, a restrained movement of tension, then stillness again. "You should leave," Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously even. Blackthorne inclined his head. "I will. I've said what I came to say." He paused at the doorway, looking directly at Eliza. "You are standing between men who do not forgive interference. Whether he protects you or uses you is not a question you will be allowed time to answer calmly." The door shut behind him. The silence that followed was not empty. It breathed. Eliza stepped toward the book but stopped herself. "Is it real?" she asked. "Parts of it," Nathaniel replied. "Did she fear you?" "Yes." His honesty struck harder than a denial ever could. He moved closer. "Fear grows easily in solitude. And solitude, I have learned too late, is a dangerous gift." She studied him in full, seeing the fracture beneath the composure, the silent war behind his eyes. "Why tell me that?" "Because I will not let others ruin you with fragments when I can wound you with truth." Another sound, sharper this time, echoed from the far end of the house. Not footsteps. Something heavier. A door. Perhaps a gate. Nathaniel's attention shifted instantly toward it. "They're early," he muttered. Eliza felt no panic, only a strange steadiness settling into her bones. "Then I shouldn't stay." "No," he agreed. "But you shouldn't think this ends when you leave." She moved toward the hall without hesitation this time. At the threshold she paused, glancing back once. "If they're coming for you," she said, "I won't be safe anywhere." Nathaniel met her gaze. "That is precisely why this has only begun." Outside, the fog had thickened, swallowing the iron gates almost completely. As Eliza stepped into the cold air, she saw faint movement near the edge of the estate grounds, deliberate and slow, like a watcher who had no intention of being seen, yet made no effort to leave. She did not look away. Neither did the shadows. The fog had not lifted by dawn, only thinned into a pale, deceptive veil that made every tree appear closer than it was and every shadow seem slightly misplaced. Eliza Morin stood by the narrow window of her rented townhouse, watching the muted world breathe, her thoughts sharp and methodical. Sleep had not come. Warnings had a way of settling into the body like a second heartbeat, steady and impossible to ignore. A soft knock touched the door below, controlled and precise. Not a servant's haste. Not a neighbor's clumsy impatience. She opened it without waiting. Nathaniel Ashcroft stepped inside as though he had merely crossed a threshold he was accustomed to, his coat dusted with frost, his expression carved from restraint. He did not apologize for arriving unannounced. Apologies were for men who felt uncertain. "You were followed," he said quietly. "I was watched," she corrected. His eyes flickered with approval, a brief fracture in the mask. The estate was surrounded before midnight. Not openly. Not foolishly. "They're learning to be careful." She closed the door behind him. "And you're learning?" "I already learned," he replied. "I'm remembering." The room felt smaller as the fire caught in the grate, its low flames tasting the cold. Every object seemed suddenly deliberate, the table too close, the chairs too near the walls, the corners too capable of hiding intent. He moved toward her without urgency. "Blackthorn has accelerated his timetable." Eliza folded her arms. "I assumed he would." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "He has allies. Men who understand how to make problems disappear in ways that do not attract the law, only silence." "Then why come here?" she asked. "Why risk drawing them to me?" "Because he doesn't yet understand what matters to me," Nathaniel said. "And that ignorance is the last advantage I possess." The words were not comforting. They were strategic. A faint sound from the street pulled their attention. Hoofbeats slowed. Paused. A carriage settling into a lie of stillness. Eliza felt the shift in the air before Nathaniel spoke. "They're near," he said under his breath. She did not move toward the window. She did not retreat. "Then tell me exactly what you haven't before." Silence expanded, but he did not evade. "My wife did not die by illness. She did not die by accident. She died by fear." Eliza's voice lowered. "You allowed it." "I created it," he said. The admission fell like a blade placed gently on a throat, not cutting yet, but promising the possibility. "I isolated her. I taught her to doubt every kindness. I made her world smaller, narrower, sharper. I believed control was protection. I believed distance was strength." His eyes grew darker, not with shame alone, but with an understanding that had arrived too late. "She tried to leave. I refused to help. Blackthorn had been visiting in secret, watching, waiting. By the time I understood she was in danger, fear had already done what no hand ever had." Eliza felt the weight of the truth settle, heavy but clean. "And the journal?" "Real," he said. "Every word." Another sound from outside, softer now, closer. A door of a neighboring house. A step that belonged to no neighbor. "They're circling," Nathaniel said. Eliza moved toward the narrow table where a letter lay, its seal unbroken until now. She lifted it between careful fingers. "I received this an hour before you arrived." Nathaniel's eyes sharpened as he scanned it. "We know where you stand. We know who stands with you. You will be asked to choose." He folded it slowly. "They are no longer negotiating with me." The hoofbeats outside resumed, slow and deliberate, as though the driver wished to be noticed without appearing impatient. A man coughed in the distance. Not a sick cough. A signal. Nathaniel reached inside his coat and removed a small pistol, checking it with quiet efficiency, never dramatic, never rushed. You should leave this city. Eliza did not take a step. You should leave it. I cannot, he replied. Their interest follows me, not the streets. Another knock, louder now, sounded on the front door. Not violent. Not hesitant. A demand wrapped in courtesy. Eliza felt a thin strand of fear, but it did not rule her. What happens if I answer? They will smile, Nathaniel said. They will bow. They will offer protection. And they will begin building a cage around you that even I will not be able to open. The knock came again, firmer. Eliza walked toward the door, then paused. You once said you would decide whether to pull me further into danger, or teach me how to survive it. Yes. What have you decided? His gaze held hers, solid and unflinching. That I am not allowed to stand between you and the truth. Only beside you. The knock became a rap of knuckles that no longer feigned politeness. Eliza placed her hand on the handle without turning it. If I open this door, everything changes. Yes, he said. If I don't, they will return. Yes. Her mouth curved not into a smile, but into an expression of quiet resolve. Then I suppose this is the moment they've been waiting for. Nathaniel stepped closer, positioning himself just enough to be present without overshadowing her. Whatever you choose, they will not forget you now. Outside, a voice called her name, low and careful, as though it had practiced sounding harmless. Lady Morin, we wish only to ensure your safety. Eliza looked at the worn handle, the thin strip of wood that separated her from men who had already begun to shape her fate. Behind her, Nathaniel's presence settled like a breath at her shoulder. She turned the handle slowly. The door began to open.